Hey guys, Mr. McKinney here, just going over the derivative rules for the exponential and logarithmic functions and how they tie into the chain rule. So we're going to add a couple of new rules and then just work on practicing all the different rules together. So the first new rule that we are going to cover in this video is the derivative rule for an exponential function. So if you start with y equals e to the x, the derivative is e to the x. This is not a misprint. So make sure you get this rule copied down into your notes. The derivative of e to the x is e to the x. It should be the easiest one to memorize all year long because the derivative is the same thing. It's going to get more interesting when you include the chain rule. So when it's not just e to the x, but it's e to the u, where u is a function of x. Now, you can write this formula down if you want, where if y equals e to the power of u, then the derivative is u prime times e to the power of u. Or it's just the chain rule with this one. So if you understand what the chain rule means, you don't really need to memorize this formula because it's just this formula, but you're applying the chain rule. And I think it'll make more sense when we do a couple of examples with that. But if you do have e to a function, you do e to the function, and then you do the derivative of that function, just like you would always do when you're doing the chain rule. So let's do some examples. All right, so if my original function is f of x equals e to the x, and I want to find the derivative, I'm just going to use the rule. So the derivative of e to the x is e to the x, and I'm done. All right, now this one's a little bit more complicated because it's not just e to the x, it's e to the power of 4x. So this is like our y equals e to the u, so the derivative is going to be u prime times e to the u, where my u function is 4x. So off to the side, let's work that out. U equals 4x, which would mean that u prime, the derivative, is 4. So when I take the derivative of this function, I need to do u prime times e to the u. U prime was 4 times e to the u, e to the 4x. Now, I showed all the work. Most of you guys are just going to be able to go straight to the answer once you have done a lot of practice. So you'll see an exponential function. You'll know that the derivative has to have that same exponential function. So if I see this in the original function, it's in the derivative, and then I just need to make sure I use the chain rule, so I multiply by the derivative of this, which would be 4. Either of these is fine. You can say 4 times e to the power of 4x, or you can say e to the power of 4x times 4. Those are the same thing. All right, now it's going to start to get a little bit more complicated because we've got an exponential function, but we've also got the product rule because we've got this function times this function, and then within the product rule, we also have the chain rule. So we're starting to combine a lot of different properties here. So I'm going to say my u function is e to the x. I'm going to say my v function is this whole thing. So then when I do the derivative, I like to do v times u prime plus u times v prime. I'm pretty sure Mr. Jansen's switches the order, but since it's a plus, it doesn't matter. So then off to the side, I'm going to write out what u is. U is e to the x. I'm going to write out what v is, 2 minus 5x to the power of 4. I highly recommend that you guys always write this off to the side instead of trying to do it all in your head. Then find the derivative of each of these and then just plug them into the formulas. So the derivative of u is just e to the x. The derivative of e to the x does not change. Over here, when I find the derivative of v, I need to use the power rule and the chain rule. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring the exponent in front and drop the exponent. But now I need to multiply by the derivative of the inside function. So off to the side, if y was equal to 2 minus 5x, the derivative of that would be negative 5. So I need to make sure I multiply by the derivative of that, which is negative 5. And I'm going to simplify a little bit here and make it negative 20 times 2 minus 5x to the power of 3. So let's plug things into the formula. F prime of x is v, 2 minus 5x to the power of 4, times u prime, which was e to the x, plus u is e to the x, times v prime, which is negative 20, and then 2 minus 5x to the power of 3. All right, on a free response exam, you could leave your answer like this. Chances are this would be on the multiple choice portion, so you need to know how to simplify. So you're looking for what you could pull out of both terms. In this first term, you have an e to the x, and you have that in the second term, and both of them have a 2 minus 5x to the power of 3. So we could simplify it a little bit, and we'd pull out our e to the x and our 2 minus 5x to the power of 3. This first one doesn't have an e to the x anymore and would have one of these factors left over, so 2 minus 5x. And then I pull out both of these and I'm left with minus 20 from the second one. 2 minus 20 would be negative 18. So the answer you would probably see on the AP exam or on a multiple choice test in this class would look something like this. Now, there's a lot of other ways that you could simplify. You might take the negative out and move it in front. The order of these terms can change, but it would be something like this. Again, on a free response portion, you can stop at this step. You're done with calculus here. Everything else is just algebra. But you need to know how to do the algebra because the multiple choice exam will probably have this answer. All right. Let's do another example where we're combining the product rule with the chain rule. So here my u function would be e to the 4x squared minus 2, and my v function would be 3x squared. So again, when I take the derivative, it's going to be v times u prime plus u times v prime. And then off to the side, I'm going to write out both functions. Always do this off to the side. Don't try to do it all in your head. So e to the 4x squared minus 2, v is 3x squared. Let's do v first because that's going to be a little bit easier. V prime is 6x. All right, now when I take the derivative of an exponential, I need to have the entire original function in the answer and then multiplied by the derivative. So I'm going to have e to the 4x squared minus 2, and I'm going to need to make sure I multiply by the derivative of this u function. Now really it's not the u function here because this one's u, so the letters get a little bit confusing. You need to make sure you can keep track of the different variables. So in this case, y is 4x squared minus 2, so y prime would be 8x. So the derivative of this function is 8x. All right. So now I need to plug things in here. So f prime of x is equal to v was 3x squared, u prime was 8x times e to the 4x squared minus 2. I just switched the order there. U is e to the 4x squared minus 2. V prime is 6x. Again, on a free response portion, you can stop here. The calculus is done. The rest of this is just simplifying. But the multiple choice answers will be simplified, so you need to know how to simplify. The first thing I'm going to do is just multiply this out because it'll make it easier to simplify in a second. 24x cubed e to the 4x squared minus 2 plus 6x e to the 4x squared minus 2. So I can see that both terms have an e to the 4x squared minus 2, and they both have a factor of 6x. So I can pull out a 6x and an e to the power of 4x squared minus 2. And I would be left with, if I pull out 6x from here, I would be left with 4x squared. If I pull out 6x from here, I'd be left with 1. So my answer should be e to the power of 4x squared minus 2 times 6x times 4x squared plus 1. This is most likely the answer that you would see on the AP exam or on a multiple choice test in here. But you can stop here when you're doing your Math Excel practice, when you're on the free response portion. This is an acceptable answer. This is probably the one that's going to show up on the multiple choice. All right, hope this was helpful. Main thing to remember from this video is that if y equals e to the x, the derivative is e to the x. And then if you had something like y equals e to the 3x squared, the derivative would be e to the 3x squared times the derivative of 3x squared, which would be 6x. All right, hope this was helpful. There'll be another video talking about logs.